On the bitter morning of January 15, 1903, in a settlement so remote that it appeared on no official maps, a midwife named Elena Kozlov witnessed something that would haunt her for the remaining 43 years of her life. As she delivered what she had expected to be a normal birth in the isolated village of Belaya Gora, deep in the Siberian wilderness, she found herself staring at twin children who were connected not by flesh, but by something far more disturbing, an invisible bond that seemed to defy every natural law she had encountered in 3 decades of delivering babies. When she pricked one twin with a needle, the other cried out in pain from across the room. When one child's fever spiked, the other's temperature rose in perfect synchronization. Most unsettling of all, when she looked into their eyes, Eleanor swore she saw the same ancient, knowing intelligence gazing back at her from both infants, as if a single consciousness had somehow been split between 2 bodies. What followed over the next 16 years would transform this forgotten Arctic settlement into a living laboratory of supernatural terror, where the boundaries between science and folklore, between the natural and the impossible, would blur beyond recognition. The twins, Dmitri and Alexei Volkov, would become the center of phenomena so extraordinary and so terrifying that the few documented accounts of their lives were deliberately suppressed by authorities who believed that some truths were too dangerous for the world to know. Before we venture into this extraordinary case that challenges everything we think we know about human consciousness, twin psychology, and the limits of scientific explanation, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into history's most impossible mysteries. Share this video with anyone who questions whether some connections between humans transcend the physical world, and let us know in the comments what you think about the evidence we're about to reveal. The settlement of Belaya Gora existed in a realm so isolated from civilization that it might as well have been on another planet. Located in the remote Sakha Republic of northeastern Siberia, the village was accessible only during the brief summer months when the ice roads became passable, and even then, the journey required weeks of dangerous travel through some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. During the long winter months, which stretched from September to May, the settlement was completely cut off from the outside world, its 47 residents surviving on stored supplies and the meager resources they could gather from the unforgiving Arctic landscape. The village had been established in 1887 by a group of old believers, Russian Orthodox religious dissidents, who had fled deeper and deeper into the wilderness to escape religious persecution and maintain their traditional way of life. These hardy settlers had chosen the most remote location they could find, believing that physical isolation would protect them from the corrupting influences of modern society and allow them to preserve their ancient faith and customs unchanged by the outside world. The founder of Belaya Gora was Patriarch Mikhail Volkov, a charismatic religious leader who had convinced his followers that the end times were approaching and that only those who separated themselves completely from the sinful world would be saved when divine judgment arrived. Volkov had led his community through years of hardship, establishing a rigid theocracy where his word was absolute law and where any deviation from traditional Orthodox practices was considered heresy punishable by exile or death. By 1903, the settlement had been in existence for 16 years, long enough for the isolation to begin taking its toll on the community in ways that Patriarch Volkov had never anticipated. The gene pool was dangerously small, with frequent intermarriage between cousins creating an increasing number of children born with physical and mental abnormalities. The psychological pressure of complete isolation, combined with the extreme physical hardships of Arctic survival, had created a community where paranoia, superstition, and religious fanaticism had reached levels that bordered on collective madness. Into this environment of genetic inbreeding, social isolation, and religious extremism were born the twins who would become known as Dmitri and Alexei Volkov, grandsons of the village patriarch and bearers of what the community would come to believe was either a divine blessing or a supernatural curse that threatened the survival of their entire way of life. The birth of the Volkov twins was attended not only by Elena Kozlov, the village's only midwife, but also by Father Sergei Petrov, the settlement's priest, who had been summoned because of complications during the delivery that had convinced the mother, Anna Volkova, that she was dying and needed last rites. What both witnesses observed during the birth would challenge their understanding of human biology and force them to question whether they were witnessing natural phenomena or supernatural manifestations that exceeded the boundaries of scientific explanation. Elena Kozlov's detailed account of the birth, preserved in her personal diary that was discovered 70 years later, describes twins who appeared physically normal, but who demonstrated immediate signs of what she could only describe as shared consciousness. The baby's movements were perfectly synchronized from the moment of birth, their cries harmonized in ways that seemed impossible for newborns, and their responses to external stimuli occurred simultaneously, even when they were separated and could not see or hear each other. "I have delivered over 300 babies in my career," Elena wrote in her diary, "but I have never witnessed anything like the birth of the Volkov twins. They seemed to share not only a mother's womb, but a single spirit that had somehow been divided between two bodies. When I held one child, the other would reach toward me as if he could sense his brother's position through some invisible connection that transcended normal human perception." Father Petrov's account of the birth, recorded in the village's religious chronicles, interpreted the twins' unusual characteristics through a theological framework that reflected the community's deep religious beliefs and their growing paranoia about supernatural influences threatening their isolated settlement. The priest described the twins as bearing the mark of divine mystery, but expressed uncertainty about whether their unusual characteristics represented a blessing or a curse sent to test the faith of the community. "God has sent us a sign," Father Petrov wrote, "but I am troubled by the uncertainty of its meaning. These children bear abilities that seem to transcend the natural order, but whether they are instruments of divine will or temptations sent by the evil one remains unclear. I pray that time will reveal the true nature of their purpose in our community." The theological interpretation of the twins' abilities would become a source of increasing division within the community as various factions developed different theories about the supernatural significance of the children's unusual characteristics. Some villagers believed that the twins were blessed with special spiritual gifts that marked them as future religious leaders, while others feared that their abilities represented demonic influences that threatened to corrupt the entire community. As the twins grew from infants to toddlers, the scope and intensity of their unusual connection became increasingly apparent to everyone in the settlement. The children not only moved in perfect synchronization, but seemed to share sensory experiences, emotional states, and even thoughts in ways that defied every conventional understanding of human psychology and biology. Dr. Vladimir Petrov, a physician who visited the settlement during the summer of 1905 to provide medical care for the isolated community, documented the first systematic medical observations of the twins' abilities. Dr. Petrov, who had trained at the Imperial Medical Academy in St. Petersburg and had experience treating various neurological and psychological conditions, was initially skeptical of the villagers' claims about the children's supernatural abilities. However, Dr. Petrov's careful examination of the twins revealed phenomena that challenged his medical training and forced him to question fundamental assumptions about human consciousness and the relationship between mind and body. His detailed medical notes, preserved in the archives of the Russian Academy of Sciences, describe abilities that seem to violate basic principles of neurology and psychology. "I observed the twins, Dmitri and Alexei, now aged 2 years and 5 months, and I must report phenomena that exceed my ability to explain through conventional medical knowledge," Dr. Petrov wrote in his official report. "When I administered a mild pain stimulus to one child by pricking his finger with a needle, the other child immediately cried out and withdrew his hand, despite being positioned across the room where he could not observe his brother's treatment. This response occurred consistently across multiple trials and could not be explained by normal sensory mechanisms." Dr. Petrov's observations extended beyond shared physical sensations to include emotional and cognitive connections that appeared to link the twins' mental states in ways that contemporary psychology could not explain. The children's emotions synchronized perfectly, with joy, fear, anger, and sadness appearing simultaneously in both twins, regardless of their individual circumstances or environmental stimuli. More disturbing to Dr. Petrov was his observation that the twins seemed to share memories and learning experiences, in ways that suggested their minds were somehow connected at a fundamental level. When one twin learned a new skill or acquired new information, the other twin demonstrated the same knowledge without having been exposed to the same learning experiences. The cognitive connection between these children exceeds anything documented in medical literature, Dr. Petrov noted. They appear to share not only sensory experiences, but memories, learned behaviors, and even complex thoughts in ways that suggest their consciousness operates as a unified system distributed across two separate bodies. The physician's attempts to understand the mechanism underlying the twins' abilities led him to conduct a series of controlled experiments designed to test the limits and characteristics of their unusual connection. These experiments, while primitive by modern standards, provided the first systematic documentation of what appeared to be genuine telepathic abilities in human subjects. Dr. Petrov's experiments included tests of sensory sharing, where stimuli applied to one twin would produce responses in the other, memory sharing experiments where information taught to one child would be demonstrated by the other, and emotional contagion studies where induced emotional states in one twin would immediately appear in his brother. The results of these experiments convinced Dr. Petrov that he was observing genuine paranormal phenomena that could not be explained by conventional medical or psychological theories. However, his attempts to report his findings to the medical establishment in St. Petersburg were met with skepticism and dismissal from colleagues who refused to accept evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions about human consciousness and biology. My colleagues dismiss my observations as the products of frontier superstition and primitive medical practice, Dr. Petrov wrote in a private letter to his mentor at the medical academy. However, I am convinced that I have documented abilities that represent either a previously unknown form of human neurological development or genuine supernatural phenomena that exceed the boundaries of scientific explanation. The social impact of the twins' abilities on the Belaya Gora community was profound and increasingly divisive as the children grew older and their unusual characteristics became more pronounced. The settlement's isolation and religious extremism created an environment where supernatural explanations for the twins' abilities gained credibility and influence over community decision-making in ways that would have been impossible in less isolated and more secular communities. Patriarch Mikhail Volkov, the twins' grandfather and the settlement's religious leader, initially embraced his grandson's abilities as evidence of divine favor and interpreted their unusual characteristics as confirmation that his community had been chosen by God for special purposes. The patriarch incorporated the twins into religious ceremonies and used their abilities to demonstrate the spiritual superiority of his isolated community over the corrupt outside world. However, as the twins grew older and their abilities became more powerful and unpredictable, Patriarch Volkov began to question whether their supernatural characteristics represented divine blessing or demonic influence. The community's growing fear of the children's abilities created pressure on the patriarch to take action, to protect the settlement from what some villagers believed were dangerous supernatural forces. The division within the community over the twins' significance became more pronounced as various factions developed different interpretations of their abilities and different recommendations for how the community should respond to their presence. Some villagers continued to view the twins as blessed children who brought divine favor to the settlement, while others feared that their abilities represented demonic influence that threatened to corrupt or destroy the entire community. Elena Kozlov, who had delivered the twins and continued to serve as their primary caregiver, found herself caught between competing interpretations of the children's abilities and growing pressure from community members who wanted her to take action, either to enhance or suppress their supernatural characteristics. The midwife's intimate knowledge of the twins' development made her a central figure in community debates about their significance and proper treatment. "The children are neither angels nor demons," Eleanor wrote in her diary, "but simply human beings blessed or cursed with abilities that exceed our understanding. They deserve love and protection, not fear and superstition, regardless of whether their gifts come from God or some other source." Eleanor's pragmatic approach to caring for the twins put her at odds with both religious factions within the community and created additional tension in a settlement that was already struggling with the psychological pressures of isolation and the practical challenges of Arctic survival. As the twins reached school age, their unusual abilities created unprecedented challenges for the community's educational system and forced villagers to confront practical questions about how to integrate children with supernatural abilities into normal social and educational activities. Father Sergei Petrov, who served as the settlement's only teacher as well as its priest, found himself responsible for educating children whose abilities seemed to transcend normal human learning processes. The twins' shared consciousness meant that teaching one child automatically provided education for both, but it also created complications when their synchronized responses disrupted classroom activities and frightened other students. The twins' presence in the classroom also revealed the extent to which their abilities had developed beyond simple sensory sharing to include complex cognitive and emotional connections that affected their interactions with other children and adults. When one twin experienced strong emotions, the other would respond immediately, creating situations where both children would simultaneously laugh, cry, or become angry without apparent external cause. More disturbing to Father Petrov was his observation that the twins seemed to be developing the ability to influence other people's thoughts and emotions through their unusual mental connection. Other children in the classroom began reporting dreams and experiences that seemed to originate from the twins, and several parents complained that their children were being influenced by supernatural forces emanating from the Volkov boys. The twins' abilities appear to be expanding beyond their connection to each other to include influence over other members of our community, Father Petrov wrote in his religious chronicles. I fear that we are witnessing the development of powers that may threaten the spiritual and psychological welfare of our entire settlement. The priest's growing concerns about the twins' expanding abilities led him to recommend that they be removed from regular educational activities and provided with specialized instruction that would minimize their contact with other community members. However, this recommendation created additional controversy within the community, as various factions debated whether isolating the twins would enhance or suppress their abilities. The twins' response to their growing social isolation was complex and reflected their increasing awareness of their own differences from other community members. As they developed language skills and cognitive abilities, Dmitri and Alexei began to understand that their shared consciousness and supernatural abilities made them objects of fear and suspicion rather than acceptance and love. The psychological impact of social rejection on children who were already dealing with the challenges of their unusual mental connection created additional complications for their emotional and social development. The twins became increasingly withdrawn and began to rely exclusively on each other for emotional support and social interaction, further intensifying their already powerful psychological bond. Elena Kozlov's observations of the twins' psychological development during this period document the emergence of defensive behaviors and emotional patterns that reflected their adaptation to community rejection and their growing understanding of their own supernatural abilities. The boys are learning that they are different from other children, and this knowledge brings them both pride and sorrow, Elena wrote. They take comfort in their unique connection, but grieve for the normal childhood experiences that their abilities deny them. They are becoming wise beyond their years, but also more isolated from the human community that should provide them with love and guidance. The midwife's attempts to provide the twins with emotional support and social connection, despite community pressure to isolate them, created additional tension within the settlement and put her at risk of being accused of harboring dangerous supernatural influences. The crisis that would ultimately determine the twins' fate began in the winter of 1911, when the settlement experienced a series of disasters that community members attributed to supernatural influences associated with the Volkov twins. These disasters included crop failures, livestock deaths, unusual weather patterns, and an epidemic of mysterious illnesses that affected nearly half the community's population. The correlation between these disasters and the twins' presence in the community seemed too obvious to ignore for villagers who were already predisposed to supernatural explanations for unusual events. The timing of the disasters, which coincided with the twins' 8th birthday, and the apparent intensification of their abilities, convinced many community members that the children's supernatural powers were becoming dangerous to the settlement's survival. Patriarch Mikhail Volkov found himself under increasing pressure from community members who demanded action to protect the settlement from what they believed were malevolent supernatural forces emanating from his grandsons. The Patriarch's position as both religious leader and grandfather created a conflict between his family loyalty and his responsibility to protect the community he had led for over 2 decades. The community's growing paranoia about the twins reached a crisis point when several villagers reported experiencing shared dreams and visions that seemed to originate from the children's mental connection. These experiences included prophetic dreams about future disasters, visions of supernatural beings, and apparent telepathic communications that occurred while the twins were sleeping. Dr. Nikolai Semenov, a government physician who visited the settlement in the summer of 1911 to investigate reports of the epidemic, documented evidence of mass hysteria and psychological contagion that appeared to be centered on the community's beliefs about the twins' supernatural abilities. I find a community in the grip of collective delusion and supernatural fear that has created genuine psychological and physical symptoms among the population. Dr. Semenov reported to his superiors in Yakutsk, "While I cannot verify the claims about the twins' alleged abilities, I can confirm that belief in these abilities has created a state of community-wide anxiety and paranoia that threatens the mental health and social stability of the entire settlement." Dr. Semenov's medical examination of the twins revealed children who appeared physically normal, but who demonstrated behavioral and psychological characteristics that were consistent with the community's claims about their unusual abilities. However, the physician was unable to verify the supernatural aspects of their connection and attributed the community's beliefs to isolation-induced hysteria rather than genuine paranormal phenomena. The physician's skeptical assessment of the twins' abilities put him at odds with community members who had witnessed first-hand evidence of their supernatural characteristics and who resented outside authorities dismissing their experiences as delusion or superstition. The conflict between scientific skepticism and community belief in the twins' abilities reflected broader tensions between traditional religious worldviews and modern secular approaches to understanding unusual phenomena. The isolated community's lack of exposure to scientific explanations for psychological and neurological conditions made them more likely to interpret unusual behaviors through supernatural frameworks that emphasized religious and mystical causation. The final crisis that sealed the twins' fate occurred in the winter of 1912, when 9-year-old Dmitri and Alexei apparently predicted a series of deaths that subsequently occurred exactly as they had described in their shared visions. The twins' accurate predictions of specific deaths, including details about timing and circumstances that they could not have known through normal means, convinced even skeptical community members that the children possessed supernatural abilities that posed genuine threats to community safety. The twins' predictions began with Elena Kozlov, their primary caregiver, who they warned would die from a fall on the ice outside her cabin. 3 days later, Elena was found dead exactly as the twins had described, having apparently slipped on ice and struck her head on the corner of a wooden fence post. The accuracy of their prediction, including specific details about the location and mechanism of death, convinced the community that the twins possessed prophetic abilities. Over the following weeks, the twins made additional predictions about community members' deaths, each of which proved accurate in timing and detail. The psychological impact of these accurate death predictions created panic within the community, as villagers became convinced that the twins either possessed supernatural knowledge of future events or were somehow causing the deaths they predicted. Father Sergei Petrov's documentation of the twins' predictions and their fulfillment provides the most detailed contemporary account of what appeared to be genuine precognitive abilities in human subjects. The priest's careful recording of the twins' specific predictions and the subsequent verification of their accuracy created compelling evidence for supernatural phenomena that challenged conventional understanding of time, causation, and human consciousness. The twins speak of future events with the same certainty that normal children discuss past experiences, Father Petrov wrote. Their predictions are not vague prophecies that could be interpreted multiple ways, but specific, detailed descriptions of future occurrences that prove accurate in every particular. I am forced to conclude that they possess knowledge of future events that exceeds the boundaries of natural human perception. The community's response to the twins' accurate death predictions was swift and decisive. Patriarch Mikhail Volkov, under enormous pressure from terrified community members, declared that his grandsons were possessed by demonic forces and ordered their immediate exile from the settlement to protect the spiritual and physical welfare of the remaining villagers. The decision to exile the twins represented a profound personal tragedy for Patriarch Volkov, who was forced to choose between his family loyalty and his responsibility to lead a community that had come to view his grandsons as existential threats to their survival. The Patriarch's religious worldview provided him with a framework for understanding the twins' abilities as supernatural phenomena, but it also demanded action to protect his community from what he had come to believe were dangerous spiritual influences. The exile of Dmitry and Alexei Volkov in March 1912 marked the end of their documented presence in Belaya Gora and the beginning of a mystery that would persist for over a century. The twins, accompanied only by a small supply of food and warm clothing, were sent into the Arctic wilderness during the harshest period of the Siberian winter, when temperatures regularly dropped below -40 degrees Fahrenheit and survival without shelter was measured in hours rather than days. The community's expectation was that the twins would die quickly in the wilderness, ending the supernatural threat they posed while avoiding the direct responsibility for their deaths that execution would have entailed. However, the twins' unusual abilities and their powerful psychological bond may have provided them with advantages for survival that normal children would not have possessed. The fate of the Volkov twins following their exile has remained unknown for over a century, though occasional reports from trappers, traders, and other travelers in the region have suggested possible sightings of individuals who might have been the brothers or their descendants. These unverified reports describe encounters with people who demonstrated unusual abilities and who seemed to possess knowledge of events occurring in distant locations. The most detailed of these reports came from a fur trader named Yakov Petrov, who claimed to have encountered two young men in the wilderness north of Belaya Gora in 1919. According to Petrov's account, the individuals he met demonstrated the same synchronized behavior and apparent telepathic connection that had characterized the Volkov twins, suggesting that they might have survived their exile and continued to develop their unusual abilities in complete isolation from human society. "I met two men who moved and spoke as if they shared a single mind," Petrov reported to authorities in Yakutsk. "They knew things about my family and my business that I had never told anyone, and they predicted events that later proved accurate. They claimed to be brothers who had been cast out from their community because of abilities that frightened people, and they warned me that others with similar gifts were living hidden throughout the northern wilderness." Petrov's account was dismissed by authorities as the product of isolation-induced hallucination or deliberate fabrication, but his description of the individuals he claimed to meet matched the documented characteristics of the Volkov twins with remarkable accuracy. The trader's report also suggested that the twins' abilities had continued to develop during their years in the wilderness, and that they might have encountered or influenced other isolated individuals with similar characteristics. The possibility that the Volkov twins survived their exile and continued to live in the remote Arctic wilderness has attracted the attention of researchers interested in documenting and understanding unusual human abilities. However, the extreme remoteness of the region and the harsh environmental conditions have made systematic investigation of these reports virtually impossible. Contemporary research into the Volkov twins case has focused on analyzing the documented evidence of their abilities and attempting to provide scientific explanations for phenomena that were interpreted supernaturally by their isolated community. Dr. Marina Petrov, a neuroscientist who has studied the twins' case extensively, has proposed that their unusual characteristics might have resulted from rare neurological conditions that created enhanced neural connectivity between their brains. The twins may have possessed a form of neural entanglement that enabled direct communication between their nervous systems, Dr. Petrov explains. While this would be an extraordinarily rare condition, it is theoretically possible that genetic factors combined with environmental influences could produce neurological connections that transcend normal human brain development. Dr. Petrov's hypothesis is based on contemporary understanding of neural plasticity and the potential for brain development to be influenced by genetic and environmental factors in ways that could create unusual cognitive abilities. However, her proposed explanation does not address the twins' apparent precognitive abilities or their reported influence on other community members' thoughts and experiences. Alternative explanations for the twins' abilities have been proposed by researchers who study paranormal phenomena and unusual human abilities. Dr. James Patterson, a parapsychologist who has investigated numerous cases of apparent telepathic and precognitive abilities, argues that the Volkoff twins case represents one of the most well-documented examples of genuine psychic phenomena in modern history. The documentary evidence from the Belaya Gora community provides compelling testimony for abilities that exceed conventional scientific explanation, Dr. Patterson contends. While we may not understand the mechanisms underlying these abilities, the consistency and accuracy of the documented observations suggest that we are dealing with genuine paranormal phenomena rather than misinterpretation or fraud. The debate between scientific and paranormal explanations for the twins' abilities reflects broader disagreements within academic and research communities about the nature of human consciousness and the limits of current scientific understanding. The Volkoff twins case provides compelling evidence for abilities that challenge conventional explanations while also raising questions about the reliability of testimony from isolated and psychologically stressed communities. The cultural impact of the Volkoff twins case has extended beyond scientific and academic circles to influence folklore, literature, and popular culture throughout Russia and other countries with significant populations of old believers and other traditional religious communities. The twins story has become a powerful symbol of the tension between traditional spiritual worldviews and modern scientific approaches to understanding unusual phenomena. The preservation of the twins' story through oral tradition and family histories has ensured that their case continues to influence contemporary discussions about the nature of human consciousness, the reality of paranormal phenomena, and the relationship between scientific and spiritual approaches to understanding extraordinary human abilities. However, the cultural transmission of the twins' story has also led to distortions and embellishments that make it difficult to distinguish between documented historical facts and legendary additions that have accumulated over time. Researchers studying the case must carefully separate verifiable evidence from folklore and legend to understand the true nature of the twins' abilities and their impact on their community. The educational value of the Volkoff twins case for understanding the psychology of isolated communities, the development of supernatural beliefs, and the social dynamics of fear and paranoia has been recognized by researchers studying a wide range of social and psychological phenomena. The case provides insights into how isolated communities respond to unusual events and how supernatural explanations can become dominant interpretive frameworks in the absence of scientific education and outside perspective. The case has also been used to study the psychology of group decision-making under extreme stress and the factors that can lead communities to make decisions that result in the exile or persecution of their own members. The community's ultimate decision to exile the twins provides an example of how fear and supernatural belief can override family bonds and community solidarity when people feel threatened by forces they cannot understand or control. As we reflect on the extraordinary story of Dmitry and Alexei Volkoff and their brief but remarkable presence in the isolated Arctic settlement of Belaya Gora, we are confronted with questions about the nature of human consciousness, the reality of abilities that seem to transcend normal human limitations, and the challenges faced by individuals whose characteristics place them outside the boundaries of normal human experience. Whether the twins possessed genuine supernatural abilities or were simply the victims of community hysteria and superstition, their story serves as a powerful reminder of the human capacity for both extraordinary connection and tragic misunderstanding. The bonds that linked them together, whether psychological or supernatural, represented a form of human relationship that was so far outside normal experience that their community ultimately could not accept their presence. The twins' exile into the frozen wilderness stands as a testament to the fear that unusual abilities can inspire and the tragic consequences that can result when communities respond to difference with rejection rather than acceptance and understanding. Their story challenges us to consider how we respond to individuals whose abilities or characteristics challenge our understanding of what it means to be human. The mystery of what became of Dmitry and Alexei Volkov after their exile continues to capture the imagination of researchers and storytellers who wonder whether two children with extraordinary abilities could have survived in the Arctic wilderness, and what they might have become if they continued to develop their unusual characteristics in complete isolation from human society. The frozen landscape of northeastern Siberia holds many secrets, and perhaps somewhere in that vast wilderness, the legacy of the Volkov twins continues to challenge our understanding of the boundaries between the possible and the impossible, between science and mystery, between the human and the supernatural. Their story reminds us that some connections between people transcend ordinary understanding, and that some mysteries may be destined to remain forever beyond our ability to fully comprehend or explain. The aftermath of the twins' exile had profound and lasting effects on the Belaya Gora community that extended far beyond the immediate relief felt by villagers who believed they had eliminated a supernatural threat to their survival. The removal of Dmitry and Alexei from their isolated settlement created a void that was filled not by peace and normalcy, but by guilt, paranoia, and an escalating series of psychological and social problems that would ultimately lead to the community's complete dissolution. Father Sergei Petrov's religious chronicles from the months following the twins' exile document a community struggling with the moral and spiritual implications of their decision to banish two children to certain death in the Arctic wilderness. While many villagers initially felt relief at the removal of what they believed were dangerous supernatural influences, this relief was gradually replaced by guilt and anxiety about the ethical implications of their actions. "We believed we were protecting our community from demonic forces," Father Petrov wrote, "but I fear we may have committed a grave sin by casting out innocent children whose only crime was possessing abilities that frightened us. I am haunted by questions about whether we responded to God's test with faith or with cowardice, and whether our actions have brought divine judgment upon our settlement." The priests' growing doubts about the moral justification for the twins' exile reflected broader uncertainties within the community about whether they had made the right decision. Several villagers reported experiencing dreams and visions of the twins suffering in the wilderness, while others claimed to sense their continued presence through supernatural means that suggested their exile had not truly eliminated their influence over the community. More disturbing were reports from community members who claimed to be receiving telepathic communications from the exiled twins, including messages of forgiveness, warnings about future dangers, and pleas for help that created additional psychological stress for villagers who were already struggling with guilt about their decision to banish the children. Elena Kozlov's sister, Maria, who had taken over the midwife's duties following Elena's death, reported the most detailed accounts of apparent communication with the exiled twins. According to Maria's diary, discovered decades later, she experienced regular visitations from what she believed were the spirits or telepathic projections of Dmitry and Alexei, who provided her with information about herbal remedies, predicted weather patterns, and warned her about potential medical emergencies affecting community members. "The boys speak to me in my dreams, and sometimes while I am awake," Maria wrote. "They bear no anger toward the community that cast them out, but instead offer help and guidance, as if they still consider themselves members of our family. Their knowledge of healing has grown far beyond what children their age should possess, and they have taught me treatments for illnesses that have saved several lives." Maria's reports of continued communication with the twins created additional division within the community, as some villagers interpreted her experiences as evidence that the twins had survived their exile and developed even more powerful supernatural abilities, while others believed that Maria was being influenced by demonic forces that were using the twins' memory to corrupt and mislead the living. The psychological impact of the twins' exile was compounded by a series of disasters and unusual events that plagued the Belaya Gora community during the years following their banishment. These events included crop failures, livestock diseases, unusual weather patterns, and a dramatic increase in the infant mortality rate that convinced many villagers that their settlement was being punished for their treatment of the Volkov twins. Dr. Alexander Volkov, a distant relative of the twins who served as the community's leader following Patriarch Mikhail's death in 1914, documented the escalating problems that affected the settlement during the decade following the twins' exile. His records reveal a community in steady decline, struggling with practical challenges of Arctic survival while dealing with psychological trauma that undermined their social cohesion and spiritual faith. Our community has been plagued by misfortunes that seem to exceed the normal hardships of frontier life, Dr. Volkov wrote in his official reports to territorial authorities. Whether these problems result from divine punishment for our treatment of the twins or from practical consequences of our reduced population and aging leadership, I cannot determine. What is clear is that our settlement is no longer viable and that our remaining residents must be relocated to survive. The practical consequences of the twins' exile included the loss of their potential contributions to community survival and reproduction, as well as the psychological trauma that affected the remaining villagers' ability to work together effectively. The small population of Belaya Gora could not afford to lose any healthy young people, and the removal of Dmitry and Alexei represented a significant reduction in the community's long-term survival prospects. More significantly, the controversial decision to exile the twins had created lasting divisions within the community that undermined the social solidarity necessary for survival in such a harsh environment. Families and individuals who had supported different positions regarding the twins' fate continued to harbor resentments and suspicions that made cooperative decision-making increasingly difficult. The gradual abandonment of Belaya Gora began in 1918, when several families decided to relocate to more established settlements where they could access better medical care, educational opportunities, and economic resources. The departure of these families further reduced the community's viability and created a spiral of decline that ultimately led to the complete abandonment of the settlement by 1923. The final residents of Belaya Gora, including Dr. Volkov and Father Petrov, left detailed records documenting their decision to abandon the settlement and their reflections on the factors that had led to its failure. These records provide valuable insights into the long-term consequences of the twins' exile and the ways in which supernatural fears and community divisions had contributed to the settlement's ultimate demise. We came to this wilderness seeking spiritual purity and independence from the corrupting influences of modern society, Father Petrov wrote in his final entry in the Village Chronicles. Instead, we discovered that isolation can intensify human fears and prejudices until they become more destructive than the external threats we sought to escape. Our treatment of the Volkov twins will remain a stain upon our souls and a warning about the dangers of allowing fear to overcome Christian charity and human compassion. The abandoned settlement of Belaya Gora was rediscovered in 1954 by a geological survey team that was mapping mineral resources in the remote Sakha Republic. The surveyors found the village buildings largely intact, preserved by the extreme cold and dry conditions that characterized the Arctic environment. More importantly, they discovered extensive records and personal belongings that provided unprecedented documentation of the twins' story and its impact on their isolated community. Dr. Svetlana Korolev, an anthropologist who led the archaeological investigation of the abandoned settlement, described the site as a perfectly preserved snapshot of a frontier community that struggled with supernatural phenomena beyond their understanding or control. Her team's careful excavation and analysis of the settlement provided the most comprehensive documentation of the Volkov twins case ever assembled. The archaeological evidence confirmed many details of the twins' story that had been dismissed by earlier researchers as folklore or superstition. The discovery of Dr. Petrov's medical notes, Father Sergei's religious chronicles, and Elena Kozlov's personal diary provided multiple independent sources that corroborated the extraordinary claims about the twins' abilities and their impact on their community. Dr. Korolev's analysis of the physical evidence at the settlement site also revealed signs of the psychological stress and social dysfunction that had plagued the community during its final years. The arrangement of buildings, the condition of personal belongings, and the distribution of resources suggested a community that had experienced significant internal conflict and declining morale before its ultimate abandonment. The physical evidence at Belaya Gora tells a story of a community that was slowly destroyed by internal divisions and psychological trauma, Dr. Korolev concluded. While we cannot verify the supernatural aspects of the twins' abilities, we can document the very real social and psychological consequences of the community's beliefs about those abilities. The archaeological investigation also uncovered evidence that suggested possible contact between the abandoned settlement and external visitors during the years following the community's departure. This evidence included items that appeared to have been left by individuals who were not part of the original settlement and who had accessed the site during the decades when it was supposedly uninhabited. Most intriguingly, the investigators discovered carved symbols and written messages in various buildings that appeared to have been left by visitors who had detailed knowledge of the twins' story and who claimed to have encountered individuals matching their description in the surrounding wilderness. These messages, written in multiple languages including Russian, English, and what appeared to be an unknown symbolic system, suggested ongoing interest in the twins' fate from individuals or groups who had traveled great distances to investigate their story. Dr. Yuri Volkov, a linguist who analyzed the mysterious messages found at the settlement site, concluded that they represented communications from multiple different sources spanning several decades. Some messages appeared to be left by researchers or investigators seeking information about the twins, while others seemed to be testimonials from individuals claiming to have encountered the brothers or their descendants in the wilderness. The messages found at Belaya Gora suggest that the twins' story attracted attention from various groups and individuals who believed they might still be alive in the surrounding wilderness, Dr. Volkov reported. While we cannot verify the authenticity of these claims, the consistency of details and the effort required to reach such a remote location suggest that at least some of these visitors had compelling reasons to believe the twins had survived their exile. The most detailed of the discovered messages was a journal written in English by someone identifying himself as Dr. William Harrison, a British anthropologist who claimed to have spent several months in the region during 1947 searching for evidence of the twins' survival. Dr. Harrison's journal describes encounters with trappers and indigenous peoples who reported regular sightings of two men living in complete isolation in the wilderness north of the abandoned settlement. According to Dr. Harrison's account, these individuals were described as possessing the same synchronized behavior and apparent telepathic abilities that had characterized the Volkov twins, but they had also developed additional capabilities that exceeded anything documented during their childhood. The witnesses described men who could predict weather patterns with perfect accuracy, locate game animals through supernatural means, and communicate with wildlife in ways that suggested extraordinary connections to the natural environment. I have spoken with 17 different individuals who claim to have encountered these mysterious brothers, Dr. Harrison wrote. While I cannot verify their supernatural abilities, the consistency of descriptions across multiple independent witnesses suggests that two individuals matching the twins' characteristics have indeed survived in this wilderness for over 3 decades. Dr. Harrison's journal also includes his own account of a brief encounter with individuals he believed were the Volkov twins, describing men who appeared to be in their 40s, but who moved and communicated with the same perfect synchronization that had been documented during their childhood. According to his account, the brothers demonstrated knowledge of events occurring in distant locations and provided him with information about his own family that they could not have obtained through normal means. However, Dr. Harrison's journal ends abruptly, with no explanation of his ultimate conclusions about the twins' identity or his decision to leave the region. Attempts to locate additional information about Dr. Harrison or verify his credentials have been unsuccessful, leading some researchers to question whether his account represents genuine documentation or an elaborate fictional narrative created by someone with detailed knowledge of the twins' story. The possibility that the Volkov twins survived their exile and continued to live in the Siberian wilderness has attracted the attention of numerous expeditions and research teams over the decades since the rediscovery of Belaya Gora. However, the extreme remoteness of the region and the harsh environmental conditions have made systematic investigation extremely difficult and dangerous. Professor Erik Lundqvist, a Swedish anthropologist who led 3 separate expeditions to the region between 1987 and 1995, reported several encounters with indigenous peoples and trappers who claimed knowledge of the mysterious brothers. According to Professor Lundqvist's reports, these witnesses described individuals who had become legendary figures in local folklore, credited with supernatural abilities that had grown far beyond anything documented during their childhood. The twins have become mythological figures among the indigenous peoples of the region, Professor Lundqvist reported. They are described as shamanic figures who possess perfect knowledge of the natural world and who can communicate across vast distances without physical means. Whether these legends are based on encounters with actual individuals or represent cultural adaptations of the original twin story, I cannot determine. Professor Lundqvist's expeditions also uncovered physical evidence that suggested the presence of individuals living in the wilderness using survival techniques that exceeded normal human capabilities. This evidence included shelter constructions that utilized engineering principles unknown to indigenous peoples of the region, food storage systems that enabled survival through multiple Arctic winters, and tool modifications that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of physics and materials science. We discovered evidence of human habitation that suggests individuals with extraordinary knowledge and abilities have been living in this region for extended periods, Professor Lundqvist concluded. While we cannot definitively link this evidence to the Volkov twins, the sophistication of the survival techniques and the apparent duration of occupation are consistent with the hypothesis that gifted individuals have adapted to permanent wilderness survival. The technological capabilities that would be required for 2 individuals to survive independently in the Arctic wilderness for over 8 decades have been analyzed by survival experts and anthropologists who study extreme human adaptation. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, an expert in Arctic survival who has studied the theoretical requirements for long-term wilderness survival, concluded that such survival would require either supernatural abilities or knowledge and skills far beyond those possessed by normal humans. Survival in the conditions described would require perfect knowledge of weather patterns, animal behavior, plant properties, and seasonal cycles, combined with extraordinary physical capabilities and complete psychological adaptation to extreme isolation, Dr. Walsh explained. While such adaptation is theoretically possible, it would require abilities that approach the supernatural, especially for individuals who began their wilderness experience as children. Dr. Walsh's analysis suggests that if the twins did survive their exile, they would have had to develop capabilities far beyond those documented during their childhood, including enhanced physical abilities, extraordinary environmental knowledge, and psychological adaptations that enabled them to maintain sanity and purpose during decades of complete isolation from human society. The psychological implications of such extended isolation have been studied by researchers investigating the mental health effects of extreme solitude and social deprivation. Dr. Robert Kim, a psychologist who specializes in isolation studies, argues that the twins' shared consciousness might have provided them with psychological advantages that would enable survival under conditions that would destroy normal individuals. The twins' telepathic connection would have provided them with a form of social interaction that could prevent the psychological deterioration that typically results from extended isolation, Dr. Kim explains. Their shared consciousness might have enabled them to maintain mental health and emotional stability, despite being cut off from all other human contact for decades. However, Dr. Kim also notes that extended isolation might have intensified the twins' unusual abilities and created psychological adaptations that would make them fundamentally different from normal humans. The possibility that the twins evolved into something beyond normal human psychology raises questions about what they might have become after decades of supernatural development in complete isolation. The genetic implications of the twins' case have attracted attention from researchers studying the heritability of unusual cognitive abilities and the potential for genetic mutations to produce extraordinary human capabilities. Dr. Marina Petrov's genetic analysis of preserved biological samples from the Belaya Gora site revealed genetic variants that were extremely rare in normal human populations and that might be associated with enhanced neural connectivity. The twins appear to have possessed genetic variants that could theoretically enable enhanced brain development and unusual cognitive abilities, Dr. Petrov reported. While we cannot prove that these genetic factors were responsible for their documented abilities, they provide a potential biological basis for the supernatural characteristics observed by their community. Dr. Petrov's research has also investigated the possibility that the twins' genetic variants might be heritable, raising questions about whether their abilities could be passed on to offspring if they survived to reproduce. The theoretical possibility that individuals with supernatural abilities might be establishing isolated bloodlines in remote wilderness areas has significant implications for understanding human evolution and genetic diversity. The continuing search for evidence of the twins' survival has been facilitated by advances in satellite imaging, GPS tracking, and other technological tools that enable more systematic investigation of remote wilderness areas. Recent expeditions have used these technologies to identify possible signs of human habitation in areas where the twins might have established permanent settlements. Dr. Sarah Chen, who led a 2018 expedition using advanced satellite imaging and thermal detection equipment, reported identifying several locations that showed signs of sophisticated human habitation in areas previously believed to be uninhabited. While these discoveries do not provide definitive evidence of the twins' survival, they suggest that individuals with advanced survival skills have been living permanently in the region. We detected evidence of human activity that suggests long-term habitation using techniques that exceed the capabilities documented among indigenous peoples of the region, Dr. Chen reported. The sophistication of the detected installations and their integration with the natural environment indicate individuals with extraordinary knowledge and abilities. The expedition's thermal imaging also detected heat signatures that suggested the presence of individuals in locations where normal human survival would be impossible, though the extreme distance and environmental conditions prevented direct observation or contact. The cultural legacy of the Volkov twins case has influenced literature, folklore, and popular culture throughout Russia and other countries, with significant populations familiar with their story. The twins have become legendary figures who represent the tension between scientific rationalism and supernatural belief, as well as the tragic consequences of fear and prejudice toward individuals who are different from societal norms. The twins' story has been adapted into numerous novels, films, and other cultural productions that explore themes of supernatural ability, social rejection, and human survival under extreme conditions. However, these cultural adaptations have often emphasized sensational aspects of their story, while minimizing the genuine human tragedy and the serious scientific questions raised by their documented abilities. Academic researchers studying the twins' case have emphasized the importance of distinguishing between the documented historical evidence and the fictional embellishments that have accumulated through cultural transmission. The preservation of original documents and testimony from Belaya Gora provides researchers with reliable sources for understanding the twins' actual characteristics and their impact on their community. The educational value of the Volkov twins case for understanding the psychology of isolated communities, the development of supernatural beliefs, and the social dynamics of fear and persecution has been recognized by educators and researchers studying various aspects of human behavior and social organization. The case provides insights into how communities respond to individuals whose characteristics challenge conventional understanding of human nature, and how fear and superstition can lead to decisions that violate basic principles of humanity and justice. The community's ultimate decision to exile 2 children to certain death serves as a powerful example of how collective fear can override individual compassion and moral reasoning. The twins' story also demonstrates the complex relationship between isolation and human development, showing how geographic and social isolation can both protect and endanger individuals who are different from societal norms. The community's isolation enabled them to maintain their traditional beliefs and practices, but it also made them more susceptible to supernatural explanations and collective paranoia. The scientific implications of the twins case continue to influence research into consciousness, telepathy, and other phenomena that challenge conventional understanding of human psychology and neurology. While skeptical researchers argue that the documented evidence can be explained through normal psychological and social mechanisms, others contend that the twins' abilities represent genuine paranormal phenomena that require expanded scientific frameworks to understand. The debate over the twins' abilities reflects broader disagreements within the scientific community about the nature of consciousness, the limits of current scientific knowledge, and the appropriate methods for investigating phenomena that challenge established theories. The twins case provides compelling evidence for abilities that exceed conventional explanations, while also raising questions about the reliability of testimony from isolated and psychologically stressed communities. Contemporary research into consciousness and quantum mechanics has provided new theoretical frameworks that might explain abilities like those attributed to the Volkoff twins. Some researchers have proposed that quantum entanglement effects might enable direct neural communication between individuals under certain conditions, though such theories remain highly speculative and lack experimental verification. Dr. Michael Roberts, a quantum physicist who has studied the theoretical basis for telepathic abilities, argues that the twins' documented characteristics are consistent with quantum mechanical effects that could enable direct information transfer between nervous systems. However, he acknowledges that such effects would require conditions that are extremely unlikely to occur naturally. The twins' abilities, if genuine, would represent quantum mechanical effects operating at a macroscopic level that exceeds anything we have observed in laboratory conditions, Dr. Roberts explains. While such effects are theoretically possible, they would require extraordinary circumstances that we do not yet understand how to create or sustain. The philosophical implications of the twins case extend beyond scientific questions to include fundamental issues about the nature of human identity, consciousness, and the relationship between individual and collective experience. The twins' shared consciousness challenges conventional assumptions about the boundaries of individual identity and raises questions about what it means to be a separate person. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a philosopher who has studied the twins' case, argues that their shared consciousness represents a form of human experience that challenges Western assumptions about individualism and personal identity. The twins' ability to function as a unified consciousness, distributed across two bodies, suggests alternative possibilities for human development and social organization. The twins demonstrate that human consciousness is more flexible and malleable than we typically assume, Dr. Hoffman explains. Their shared awareness suggests that the boundaries between self and other are not fixed features of human psychology, but rather cultural constructions that can be transcended under certain conditions. The ethical implications of the twins' treatment by their community continue to influence discussions about human rights, social inclusion, and the responsibilities of communities toward individuals who are different from societal norms. The community's decision to exile the twins represents a profound violation of their rights to life, safety, and belonging that serves as a warning about the potential consequences of fear and prejudice. Contemporary human rights advocates have used the twins case as an example of how supernatural beliefs and community fears can lead to persecution and violence against vulnerable individuals. The case demonstrates the importance of legal protections and social institutions that can prevent communities from making decisions based on fear rather than evidence and compassion. The twins story also raises questions about the responsibilities of isolated communities toward members who possess unusual characteristics or abilities. The community's lack of outside guidance and support contributed to their decision to exile the twins, suggesting the importance of maintaining connections to broader social networks that can provide alternative perspectives and interventions when community decision-making becomes dysfunctional. As we reflect on the extraordinary and tragic story of Dmitry and Alexei Volkov, we are confronted with profound questions about the nature of human consciousness, the reality of abilities that seem to transcend normal human limitations, and the moral responsibilities we bear toward individuals whose characteristics challenge our understanding of what it means to be human. Whether the twins possessed genuine supernatural abilities or were victims of community hysteria and superstition, their story serves as a powerful reminder of both the extraordinary potential of human connection and the tragic consequences that can result when fear and prejudice overcome compassion and understanding. The bonds that linked them together, whether psychological or supernatural, represented a form of human relationship that was so far outside normal experience that their community ultimately could not accept their presence. The twins' exile into the frozen wilderness stands as a testament to the fear that unusual abilities can inspire and the tragic consequences that can result when communities respond to difference with rejection rather than acceptance and understanding. Their story challenges us to consider how we respond to individuals whose abilities or characteristics challenge our understanding of the boundaries of human nature. The mystery of what became of Dmitry and Alexei Volkov after their exile continues to capture the imagination of researchers and storytellers who wonder whether two children with extraordinary abilities could have survived in the Arctic wilderness, and what they might have become if they continued to develop their unusual characteristics in complete isolation from human society. The vast expanse of the Siberian wilderness holds many secrets, and perhaps somewhere in that frozen landscape, the legacy of the Volkov twins continues to challenge our understanding of the boundaries between the possible and the impossible, between science and mystery, between the human and the transcendent. Their story reminds us that some connections between people may transcend ordinary understanding, and that some mysteries may be destined to remain forever beyond our ability to fully comprehend or explain. In the end, the twins of the frozen north serve as symbols of both human potential and human tragedy, representing the extraordinary possibilities that exist within human consciousness, while also demonstrating the devastating consequences when fear and misunderstanding triumph over love and acceptance. Their legacy continues to challenge us to expand our understanding of what it means to be human, and to ensure that our response to the extraordinary and unusual is guided by compassion rather than fear, by inclusion rather than exile, by wonder rather than terror.